at 1 yard away, what is our offset going to look like? Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today we're going to talk about a heated topic, which is red dot zeros and what distance I should sight my pistol red dot at. That's going to work best. A lot of different opinions, and while I respect a lot of the opinions, I think it's undisputable that the 25-yard zero is the greatest zero you can have for red dot. So I was at home the other day thinking about the zeros, probably a little bit more in depth than most people ever would, and I started thinking a little bit about elevation, or how high or low your shot's going to land. It's important to understand why there is a deviance to start. So you got your optic here and you got your barrel down here, meaning that there's going to be a natural offset where your dot's seeing and where the actual point of impact is. Point of aim is going to be what the optic's seeing. At some point you need to decide where that point of impact is going to meet up with your point of aim. What I've found is the slope at a 25-yard zero is a lot less than if you had a 7-yard zero or anything in that range, 10-yard zero, 15-yard zero. So I thought, why not just write it out on paper and prove my theory? First, I put the gun with a line straight out the barrel, demonstrating our true point of impact. We're not worried about bullet drop from 25 yards away. It's going to be minimal. Then we look at the offset on the optic. Where do we want that to intersect? Is it going to be 7? Is it going to be 15? Or is it going to be 25 yards? Those are the simple ones I've taken as probably the most common. Then we take a line from where our optic actually is looking at and draw a line intersecting at 7 yards for our 7-yard zero. That's where the point of impact and point of aim are going to meet up. Now, if we do the same thing with a 25-yard zero and draw a line, you'll notice that the deviance isn't as great. There is going to be an offset, but the offset is very minimal. The least amount of deviance you're going to have is going to be your 25-yard zero. So there is a great myth that we're going to try to debunk today, which is that your offset when you have a 25-yard zero is going to be great. People saying, oh, because I zeroed my handgun at 25 yards, when I'm at 5 yards away, if I'm aiming here, I'm hitting down on the stomach. It's not true. It'll never be greater than your height over bore. Before we get into anything else here, let's prove our theory. All right, I've got my Glock 17. Actually already has a 25-yard zero, but I'm going to check that, make sure we're good to go. Using the Blazer Brass 124 grain ammunition. I have found that 124 grain ammunition is usually more consistent. A bigger grain at 25 yards generally does a lot better. So let's get our 25-yard zero confirmed. It looks like we have one flyer on the top left, which I called back there. 3 of them within that like 1.5 inch circle. For reference to my hand, I'm going to call that a good 25-yard zero. So now let's dispel myth number 1, that the offset at 7, 5, 3 yards away is going to be crazy. How big of an offset do we actually have? The offset is basically non-existent and the grouping is still really, really tight. But let's get closer and see if that remains. So let's look at our 25-yard zero and the point of impact from 5 yards away. If I'm aiming for that little tiny 1-inch circle dot, I called my first shot low, but you can see the group there is perfectly in that red dot. You really don't have to factor any offset at all from 5 yards. Flyer there, that was my flinch. Even on a tripod, you'll throw some low every once in a while. Let's see what a 25-yard zero point of impact is at 3 yards. So we're actually breaking the circle, maybe one that I shot low, but the other 3 shots just under the circle breaking the line. So if I was aiming at 3 yards for the dead center of an alpha zone head, everything would still be in the zone. So let's see what the offset really is from even the closest distance. At 1 yard away with the 25-yard zero, what is our offset going to look like? And it's pretty definitive from those results, as I basically keyholed every one of the 3 shots there, barely off the dot. If I was aiming dead center from 1 yard out, you're still going to hit within an A zone on a head box. So overall, here are our offsets. Starting at the 1 yard, which is barely off this little tiny 1-inch circle. 3 yard, just touching the bottom of the circle with one maybe flyer a little bit lower. And our 5 yard, which is basically exactly on the dot with one flyer that I put low. So at 7 yards, basically all perfectly in the X as well, with one maybe flyer. All this to show that the deviation for a 25-yard zero is nowhere near what people think it is. You're safe to say anything from 5 all the way out to 25 yards, you do not have to worry about any sort of offset whatsoever. Just put the dot where you want it to go. And even at 3 yards, you could aim center of an IPSC A-zone credit card head box, and you'd still be hitting just in the lower part of the box. So a 25-yard zero really is superior in every way to the other zeros. So the thing that we haven't covered yet is windage, or where your shot's going to go left to right. We've talked a lot about elevation, but I'm just going to make this simple because this one I feel like is pretty self-explanatory. When you're closer to the target, your groups may appear tight, but the bullet actually still travels, and you lose that data as it travels outward. So your group may appear to be really, really tiny from closer distances, but in reality, you back up to 25 yards and that group is going to expand and get wider. Whereas if you get a really good group from 25 yards, you're getting all that data back and you can actually see where it's hitting from distance. And those groups will only get better as you move back in. It's also important to know that all the graphs that I have done are not to scale. If I was doing it actually to scale, the gun would be a lot smaller on the chart and I wouldn't be using centimeters for yards. All that was for was to get a base reference of what I was trying to talk about, which is that you're making that dot look down more and it's going to cause more deviance in your shot. Though I am a believer in the 25-yard zero, it's also important to know why a 25-yard zero might not be best for what you're using. And the first thing I'll bring up is the size of your gun. In this entire experience, I've been using a full-size gun, a Glock 17. This thing is ballistically capable of hitting very tight groups from 25 yards, and so there's no reason not to zero from that distance because I can get that data cleanly. However, if you're using a gun that uses only a fraction of the barrel length, you get these micro guns out there, they're not going to have the ballistic capability to hit that tight zero from 25 yards. For the smaller guns, I recommend actually doing the furthest zero out that you can get a tight group. Now, a lot of the times that ends up being 15 yards for me. If I'm shooting a tiny 43X or something along that line, generally I would zero at 15 yards because that's where I can get the tight groups. But full size and compact guns, I have never had an issue having a tight zero at 25 yards. So know what you're shooting, know the offsets for it, zero it yourself, and be able to get that data and understand it. Because if you were ever in a situation where you had to use your gun in self-defense, you don't want to be guessing, where am I going to be point of impact from 25, 30, or 40 yards out? And if you're thinking that's not possible, I'm not going to have to take a shot that far out in any point in self-defense. There are examples out there where someone had to take a shot from 50 yards out, Eli Dicken being the most obvious example. From 50 yards out, he took shots into the threat and didn't hit anybody else in the process. And it was really important. He understood his zeros. He understood what he was capable of with his gun and what his gun was capable of. Those are really important to know. Know the purpose of your gun. Know why you want to carry a specific size of gun that you want, and know where your offsets are with that gun. Another reason you might not want to zero from 25 yards is if you have bad eyesight. If you can't see the target and you're having troubles getting a good group from distance, I'd actually recommend coming in and shoot as far out as you're capable of getting a good zero. And the reason why is because I think it's important that you yourself zero your own gun. You can't trust someone else's zero. You have to be the one to do that. You have to understand that data. You have to do the tests on your own offset in order to know where you're at. Because confidence as a shooter is everything. You never know what type of a shot you're going to have to make in self-defense or what circumstance. It could be from 50, it could be from 25, it can be from 3 yards away. You need to know where your offsets are and you need to be confident in that. You have to get your own zero to really understand that. And when it comes to getting your actual zero, I think it's also critical that you do not do it freehand. I know that there's some really great shooters out there that feel like they can get their zero perfect. They can stand at 25 yards, get a really, really good group. You can do that. That's great. I think for the majority of shooters, they can't do that, or they maybe think that they're better than they are. I still make sure that I have a rest. I have a table to set on, and then I'm taking out all the human error. Your gun is a machine. Your optic can be as finely calibrated as you're capable of shooting. I highly recommend that everybody zero, taking out all the human error that they possibly can. At the end of the day, you got to know your gun. There's something amazing that happens when people know exactly where their shots are going to hit and they have confidence. Doubt is the enemy of all shooters. If you have that doubt, that's where things go wrong, and that's where we start making mistakes. You can't afford to make those mistakes in a self-defense shooting. You need to know exactly where that bullet is and alleviate all the doubt. So in recap, if your gun's capable of making very good groups from 25 yards, I really don't see any reason why you should step in any closer. If you have a full size, if you have a compact gun, I would highly recommend having that 25-yard zero. It gives you the data you need to know that your grouping's good and to know that your deviation is going to be the very least that it possibly can be. Also be mindful, now that we know that the offset is not the issue, if your shot is dipping way low, it's likely because of recoil anticipation. On top of everything else, you need to know where your gun is. If you're going to zero at 7 yards, if you're going to zero at 10, 15, or 25 yards, know your offsets. I invite everybody to do the experiment on their own. Shoot from a rest, see where the offset is at 3, 5, 10 yards out. Start playing around with it, because the more knowledge you have, the less doubt you're going to have. And like we've talked about before, doubt is the enemy of everybody in a self-defense situation. You cannot reach an elite level if you have doubt and if you don't understand your equipment. So thanks for tuning in. Leave a comment. Tell me what you think is the best zero, and we'll catch you on the next one.